Welcome to Protecting Our Water, Air Quality, and Public Health from the Data Center Buildout. My name is Sophie Song. I'm the Data Center Policy Fellow at AI Now. This is the third session of our Data Center Policy and Practice training series based on our North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit and co-hosted with the Data Center Working Group. If you missed last week, you can watch the recording of our second session, the link in the chat. Next slide. A little bit about us. The AI Now Institute is a policy research organization that pushes back against the trajectory of the AI industry away from commercial surveillance, concentration of power, and the lack of public accountability. We're a member of the Data Center Working Group, a multi-state cross-issue working group fighting to stop the data center build-out and for a future where our tech and energy infrastructure serves the public good, not corporate interests. We offer support for site-specific data center fights, a biweekly working group for folks focused on regional and state strategies, and strategizing on federal and nationwide advocacy. Next slide. Each session of the training series dives deep into a specific policy area, zoning, water, energy, taxation, to identify the strongest possible recommendations to stop data centers, scaffold next steps to get there when it isn't possible, and real-life strategies from a panel of organizers on the ground. This isn't because policy is the be-all end-all, but because it can be a critical tool for organizing and to build power to change the conditions of the data center build-out. You can sign up for additional sessions at the same registration link now being posted in the chat. Next slide. So our session today reviews the strongest possible policy interventions to protect water, air, and public health from the data center build-out and explore how to use these protections to stop or slow data center development. To start, Allied AI Now will do a quick grounding about data center impacts on water and air, and then review the how-to of specific local policy interventions in these areas from our North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit. We'll then spend most of the session with a stellar panel of organizers and advocates featuring Amy Adams, Keyshawn Pearson, Andrea Pierce, and Amber Fellows, who will break down the on-the-ground strategies of water and land protection, water moratoriums, air pollution protection, and beyond, from North Carolina to Ypsilanti, Michigan, to Memphis, Tennessee. And now I'll pass it over to Allie to get us started.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And thank you everyone for being here. We are going to hear deeply from our panel today about the specific impacts of data centers to their communities' water, land, air quality, and public health. So I'm going to spend a few minutes focusing on how the public and the industry conversation around this topic has shifted in the last year to establish why we need strong protections. And then I'll talk a little bit about what those are. Next slide, please. So water has become a huge flashpoint around data centers, both in terms of community opposition and policymaking. As many of us know, data center water use is immense, and that's not just the operations, particularly cooling, but also construction and energy generation, which uses quite a lot of water. And these uses are often ignored. Despite the realities across the country, what we see is that data center developers and the tech industry are pushing the data center build out both in water-rich environments like the Great Lakes, as we'll hear about today, as well as water-scarce and drought-prone geographies like the Southwest. The answer to this build out is not to hand over precious water reserves where we do have them, like the Great Lakes, but to question who this build out is for and who it benefits. Communities across the country have wised up. We see people demanding, at minimum, transparency around water use, which the industry often hides, claiming it's a trade secret. We see people speaking out at town council and water utility hearings and opposing the build out altogether in an effort to protect water and land. And critically, protecting water has been an entry point to this fight for so many people from across backgrounds and beliefs, from indigenous water protectors to agricultural communities to political positions of all kinds. And there's huge organizing and policymaking opportunity. Next slide. The industry unsurprisingly, has taken notice and responded with a variety of tactics to try to smooth over or flat out obscure the water and public health impacts of data centers and to counter this growing opposition. So there is a huge risk of co-optation of water-related concerns. The industry has spun up quite a dizzying set of promises of water efficiencies, from closed loop systems to recycled wastewater to false claims of water positivity in the desert. For the record, this doesn't refer to replenishing actual water, but nominal fees paid by companies for water stewardship projects somewhere else, just as an example. We're not going to debunk all of those claims and technologies here, but we're dropping some resources into the chat for those who do want to learn more. Across the board, we have seen these promises of water efficiencies fall far short, including with XAI's commitments in Memphis, similarly to the failures of voluntary industry pledges around environmental impact and community benefit. In other words, these are not actors who can be trusted. I could tell a very similar story about the other topics we will address today, including air pollution. Industry claims of improved technology for diesel generators, for example, are being used to diminish the very real evidence around data centers' contribution to rising cancer and asthma rates across the country, as well as in locations like Boxtown, as we'll hear from Kishan today, that already face decades of environmental racism. And all of this sits within a very long history of environmental injustice, with the health of community members, land, the environment, and wildlife treated as disposable. It's important to note that these impacts are not felt equally, and it's critical that our policy and organizing solutions do not further generational harm of rural, agricultural, indigenous, Black, brown, and poor and working class communities. My final point here before shifting to the policy recommendations is that water and community health are critical organizing tools to make the stakes of this fight real and show why we need to stop and slow this build out overall rather than only mitigating harm. So how do we do this in practice? We launched a poll earlier in the session, and what you all shared is approximately 80% of our participants today aren't sure or don't know how to use air and water policies as tools to stop data centers. And this next 10 minutes will hopefully help you figure that out. And then we'll talk about actual strategies in the organizing panel. Before diving into the specifics, I just want to briefly review where these recommendations came from and where you can get more support. Next slide, please. So the North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit is geared towards stopping, slowing, and restricting rampant data center development in the US at the local, state, and federal level. Next slide. We include North Star interventions, meaning the strongest possible options, as well as scaffolded steps to get there for when that is not feasible in our different political environments. And this policy toolkit emerged from a real need on the ground from organizers and policymakers across the country to help us take advantage of critical moments of opportunity, identify and call out the strongest possible interventions, and really figure out what to do. Next slide. So this toolkit is a menu of options, mapping out all the possible policy tools from bans and zoning, which we covered in the last session, to water and air today, to energy, taxation, transparency, corporate power, and beyond, since not everything is going to be possible in every jurisdiction. But regardless of what your entry point is, this entire document, the entire toolkit, is framed around the belief that we, the public, should decide whether or not a data center works in the interests of our communities. Next slide. Some very quick shout outs. We developed this toolkit in consultation with 100+ community organizers, state advocates, technical experts, policymaker networks across the country. Some are named here, as well as existing policy resources from community groups and technical experts. And I just want to give a special shout out today to Memphis Community Against Pollution and Media Justice, who hosted an organizer training in Memphis in the fall, where a lot of this came together, as well as the Data Center Working Group and SCEN for your contributions, and Amy, particularly your leadership on the water recommendations. Next slide. Okay, let's get to our topic today. So we are going to focus on the strongest possible policy interventions to protect air, water, public health, and under that public health, we are including noise today as it deeply connects. Next slide. There are so many ways to stop a data center It's not just policy, and it's not just explicit zoning and bans as we talked about last week. So I want to highlight today that water and other community health protections can also be a way in itself to stop, limit, or politically discourage data center construction or expansion, even if that's not what the policy itself is explicitly saying. Local governments can pass water ordinances that limit the impacts of data centers and restrict data center development when the proposals do not work in communities' best interests. So one key way to do it is to define and then restrict what we call large quantity water users to be inclusive of data centers, especially hyperscalers. That means you're not passing an ordinance that says data centers can use X amount of water or can't, but you're defining large quantity water users by, in our recommendation, industries, customers that use an amount of water equaling or exceeding to 10,000 centum cubic feet per month, which is the equivalent to approximately 7,500,000 gallons of water. That, in our research, includes hyperscalers and some mid-sized data centers as well. Once in your ordinance you define large quantity water users, you can then put in certain requirements, including that they submit an application for any water usage. Critically, you can do this either through a water utility application process or as a condition within permitting under zoning law or procedure. See our last session for how to do that. And I want to highlight this because some localities will be preempted from either water regulation or zoning regulation. So I just want to emphasize that you have different options. Critically here, localities must reserve the right to determine that this large quantity water user applicant's use would be incompatible with the city's resources, which gives them the ability to reject the application. And we need to make sure that data centers are presumed rejected unless the developer is able to robustly prove that they meet all water sustainability requirements and use requirements. We have examples of this. Aurora, Colorado stipulates that high water use industries that project water demands above a certain threshold cannot be developed without specific water sustainability measures. And in these applications, a locality can require comprehensive accounting of all the different water uses and all the different water sources. This is where we see things becoming really tricky for data centers who don't like to report all of these different uses. So uses include data center construction, server cooling, facility cooling, including cooling towers, and other ancillary water uses. Many, again, projections do not account for this, so we need to be explicit. Again, we have an example here. Illinois proposed a state law requiring annual water consumption reporting for data centers broken about by month and called out cooling. That is an improvement on other policies that we've seen. Sources here, again, we want to account for all water sources, including blue, which is surface water and groundwater, pipe sources, that's municipal water, and gray sources, purified reclaimed water. Next slide, please. If you go about this approach, right, requiring applications from large quantity water users, you can also require them to submit a water conservation plan. We encourage you to require independent review of that water conservation plan. And in this process, localities can also consider prohibiting or requiring specific technologies. And this is really relevant around liquid cooling and evaporative cooling. So cooling data centers is extraordinarily resource intensive, and there's generally two ways that it happens. Two ways that data centers can cool their servers, which generate immense amounts of heat. One is server liquid cooling, which is a process that delivers liquid coolant directly to the graphic processing units and that does not consume water in that process, although it does use more energy, which has water impacts. And then air cooling, which contradictorily uses water evaporation and is therefore more water intensive. So we do have examples where localities that are in more water scarce areas can prohibit evaporative air cooling as one way to address water use. It's also important to note many localities will not have the necessary water infrastructure in place to service data centers, and instead of passing costs on to ratepayers in the form of higher utility bills, utilities and localities can require data centers to pay 100% upfront of the infrastructure costs, and localities in some cases may also be able to tax water use with no exemption and increase that tax rate during droughts. Next slide, please. Um, we are also seeing a new approach that is not yet in our toolkit, but we're going to be adding it. And we'll hear about this today from two folks in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And this is water moratoriums. These are temporary time-bound prohibitions on water for data centers. Moratoriums, which can also be used in zoning and construction, are, in this case for water, a pause on supplying water or on new applications for water use. And they can give the locality or utility time to update or issue regulations. So Ypsilanti, Michigan, huge congratulations, just passed a year-long moratorium on supplying water to new data centers. I'll let our speakers go into the specifics. But I want to emphasize here that moratoriums can be defined by the size or type of data center accessing water, or could be established for large quantity water users. They could also be on specific technologies such as evaporative cooling, like I mentioned before. And we have an example from the Southern Nevada Water Authority that's put in place a moratorium on new evaporative cooling systems in some types of buildings. This could be translated to data centers. We recommend, as with any moratorium, it's at least 6 months, ideally a year, but that's going to depend on your local environment. Next slide. Regardless of what approach you use, this really is going to apply most to the large quantity water users ordinance, but can be put in place in other ways. All of these interventions need robust transparency and actual enforcement mechanisms. So either in your water application process or perhaps in permitting processes, requiring monthly reporting from data centers around their average monthly water use, water conservation plan, water quality testing and reporting, and assessments of what types of water will be used. Critically, these applications and reporting must be made part of the public record so that this is not held behind closed doors and not considered trade secrets, which the industry loves to argue. And we also need robust enforcement measures. So that's legally binding water conservation plans, not industry pledges, which we see them loving to do across the board, and putting in place the strongest penalties available, which isn't just fines, but also actually shutting off water services for violations. Next slide, please. Going to briefly talk about air quality and community health as well. So again, this is a way to address the very, very real harms that active data centers in operation are spewing onto communities, but also a way to make your locality less attractive to these developers if you have these protections in place. So both localities and states can prohibit backup diesel generators, which are some of the most egregious polluters in data center systems. We'll hear more about that from Kishan. There's different ways to do this. The strongest is explicit prohibition, but we also need to protect against workarounds, including developers acquiring permits for diesel generators from adjacent jurisdictions. In some cases, it will not be possible to explicitly prohibit the use of backup diesel generators. So in this case, localities can put in place a whole list of requirements, such as notification of user testing, permit controls, pollution control equipment, cumulative impact reporting. We have an example from Colorado here. And then again, with enforcement and transparency, both routine monitoring and the power to revoke permits, or unfortunately, all of this is pretty symbolic. Next slide, please. We also encourage, both at the local or state level, prohibiting data centers from receiving exemptions from state emissions standards. The Maryland Public Service Commission rejected a data center's application request for an exemption from state emission rules. This is an encouraging example here, and we could get a lot stronger. Other things you can do to reduce the impact of air pollution and reductions to air quality. And this one is something that needs to be kind of strategically thought through jurisdiction to jurisdiction, are prohibiting data centers in commercial and mixed use zoning. Another way to say this is to restrict data centers only to industrial zoning. However, the note of caution here is who is historically sited and living next to industrial zones tend to be Black and Brown or poorer communities facing long legacies of environmental injustice. So siting data centers only in industrial zones does not at all mitigate the harms and in some cases could exacerbate them. And then any data center that is in operation, localities can require fence line monitoring of air quality, surface water quality, groundwater quality, continuous monitoring at the boundaries of these facilities for air pollutants, salinity, cooling system chemicals, and metals. So again, thinking expansively about the pollutants and the impacts. Next slide, please. Another tool here, and I'm just going to go over this very quickly and then we'll send the slides out after, is noise mitigation, which is also deeply linked to community health impacts. So here, I just want to note noise mitigation requirements can be included in the approval process and permitting or as a separate ordinance based on local legislative bodies' police powers. It does not have to be through zoning necessarily. So localities can require a comprehensive noise study and mitigation plan, can put out an ordinance setting the lowest possible permissible noise levels. We have a strong example in North Dakota, establishing maximum continuous sound levels as different for day and night. And this seems to be the strongest example we've found, although we encourage you to drop others into the chat. You can also vary levels by zoning, for example, requiring lower maximum levels in residential zones or abutting residential zones, and then again, requiring robust enforcement mechanisms, including a way for residents to complain, submit complaints, regular monitoring, and penalties. Next slide, please. My last point here before we open it up to our panel is that was a lot of information. How on earth do you figure out what will work in your locality? Like I said at the top, this is a menu of options and not everything is going to work in every single situation. So I'll just go through these really quick. With water, your first step is to identify who controls your water. And in some areas, including rural areas, this may actually be another municipality. So understanding who controls the water and what those rules are. And then understand if your locality is preempted by the state from specific water regulation. What do you have control over and what are you not allowed to regulate or to legislate? And then again, the approach can be in specific applications to the water utility or as a condition within permitting processes. So you can figure out what is more strategic for your location. With air quality and community health, similarly, we encourage you to check for preemption and then to figure out what is the creative approach that will work for you in terms of introducing a standalone ordinance or including in the permitting process. And with noise, the first place you will likely see existing noise regulations is in your existing zoning law, so checking there. Making sure you know if your local government has to consult a planning board around zoning law changes. Some local governments are required to do that, so that is a critical step. And then again, noise can be regulated with updating zoning law or as a separate ordinance from the local legislative body. Okay, next slide, please. Please do drop questions into the Q&A, either on that more technical presentation, and for our panelists, I'm going to bring them up now, and we are going to launch into a discussion of how are folks on the ground actually organizing for these protections or using other policy, legal, and other creative strategies. What lessons have we learned in terms of building both local and state power around water, air, and community health? So let's bring up our panel. I would love to welcome Keyshawn Pearson, a Memphis-based leader at the forefront of the fight for environmental justice. Keyshawn is Executive Director of Memphis Community Against Pollution and leads campaigns to protect South Memphis residents from toxic air pollution and safeguard community health from corporate overreach. Keyshawn has been a leader in the fight against XAI, and I'm excited to hear about that today. Amy Adams is the Deputy Director at the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, a regional network advancing equitable climate and energy solution across the U.S. South. Before that, Amy was a regional supervisor at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, so also brings deep experience around government regulation of water and other areas, and I'm excited for her to help us better understand those processes. Andrea Pierce is an Ypsilanti Township resident, Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indian citizen, and the Deputy Director of Programming at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. Andrea started as an Indigenous water protector and fought against Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline. She is the founder and chair of the Anishinaabe Caucus. She sits on the Washtenaw Environmental Council and the Huron River Watershed Council, and also is active in the Ypsilanti Township fight against the Los Alamos U of M nuclear data center. And last but certainly not least, Amber Fellows is the Ypsilanti City Council member for Ward 3, a 24-year resident, first-generation Japanese American, queer community organizer, and longtime musician. Oh, okay. Amber is a proven grassroots strategist who has mounted successful campaigns to stop the sale of public lands, passed the second community benefits ordinance in the country, and is now since taking office, has led the council to join Mayors for Peace and imposed a year-long moratorium on Los Alamos U of M AI data center. So welcome everyone. We can stop slide sharing. And we're going to launch right in. We're going to start with understanding the impacts. So Amy, what do people need to know about the water and environmental impacts of data centers, and what are the common myths that the industry is telling here?
Okay, I want to start with AI is not invisible software. It requires data centers, and data centers are very, very real physical industrial facilities. They need land, they need lots of electricity, they need a lot of water, they need sewer, roads, substations, transmission line, backup power, and public approval. We are talking about a massive build out of physical infrastructure, and that build out is having real consequences for our communities, for our water systems, for our energy systems, for public decision making, and for democracy. Yes, democracy. This is a democracy issue because communities are being asked to absorb a risk before they're giving the information they need to make a real decision. On water specifically, I think this is one of the places where the industry is most vulnerable because water forces real numbers into the conversation. How much are you using? Where is it coming from? What happens in a drought? How much is coming back out at us as wastewater? Once those numbers are public, the conversation doesn't get to just be about innovation or jobs or economic development. It becomes a conversation about public resources, public infrastructure, and who is being asked to carry that risk. I think when we talk about water, we tend to focus on water withdrawals and consumption, but we forget that there is water that must be discharged. And one piece that we need to talk about is cooling tower blowdown. That is basically the wastewater from a cooling system. So as the water goes through cooling towers, it picks up minerals and chemicals and they concentrate. And eventually, some of that water must be discharged. It is a fact. So then the question becomes, where's it going, y'all? Is it going into a waterway? Is it going into a local sewer system? Can the treatment system even handle it? What chemicals are in it? We know from environmental fights in North Carolina around coal ash that what gets discharged into our waterways and then picked up by water treatment systems matters. It can affect our drinking water treatment, public health, and long-term community risk. And so let me jump to the myths. There were a couple of myths. One myth, data centers are getting more efficient. But let me tell you, efficiency does not equal accountability. A facility can be more efficient than an older model and still create unacceptable local impacts. Another myth some groups are hearing is there's plenty of water. Abundance does not equal capacity. Water systems have limits. Sewer systems have limits. Aquifers, wetlands, rivers, and ratepayers, we all have limits. And so let's switch over to everybody's favorite myth for a second. Closed loop systems. Closed loop systems solve the water problem. A closed loop system can reduce water use, yes, but a closed loop system does not mean zero water impact. A company can very accurately say, we use closed loop cooling system and still use evaporative cooling towers that consume a substantial amount of water. What it usually means is that water or coolant circulates within some part of the system rather than being used once and discharged. That does not automatically mean that that facility is water neutral or low impact or even safe for the watershed. And lastly, I want to point out something that you touched on. It's not a myth, but it is an issue, and that is transparency. And transparency is not a side conversation. It is the starting point for democratic decision making. And NDAs are a big problem. If the public cannot see the demand, the source, the wastewater plan, the drought plan, infrastructure cost, then the community is being asked to make a decision without basic and core information that it needs to protect itself. It's not democracy. That's corporate power operating in a black box.
Thank you so much, Amy. I want that on a banner. Efficiency does not equal accountability, and abundance does not equal capacity. That is such a helpful frame. Let's talk about what this means for local fights and specific data centers. Sean, can you talk us through the broad public health impacts of data centers in the AI industry on air quality, cancer and asthma rates, and beyond? And to take the example of the XAI facilities by Boxtown in Memphis, how does this fit in the longer trajectory of environmental racism and toxic industry targeting communities?
Yeah, first, I gotta say thank you for having me, and thank you, Amy, for those incredible words. I think we have to be able to really break the myths that folks are really easy to believe, because that is what resigns them from fighting against this data center proliferation in our country. And so, the better we can do at breaking these myths, the better we can get responses that will protect us in our future. So, thank you for that. What I will say is that the health disparities are entrenched in the nature of how our country was founded and what we are living through as it pertains to zoning. And so, just quick history. The folks in Boxtown and in Westwood, where I live, built their communities from boxcars from as freed slaves, right? These folks were enslaved people who built their homes from nothing. And then on top of that, they had to survive the Memphis massacre of 1866. And so a resilient community that faced so much trauma and tragedy is continuing to face that same tragedy because in the early 1920s, there were zoning maps that created these red spaces where Black folks were regulated to live. And now what we see in this digital era is digital redlining. And so redlining in and of itself was perpetual and caused a ton of harm because not only do we have XAI and its facilities, we also host the Tennessee Valley Authority and their methane gas turbines, Valero Oil Refinery and all of the pollution that they create and emit into our air and our atmosphere. And so when we think about communities like mine in Southwest Memphis, these folks have been overburdened, and there is a cumulative burden that we carry in our bodies. It is epigenetic, right? Where you have generations of suffering, generations of folks who have cancer. I lost both of my grandmothers to cancer, multiple uncles and aunts. And recently, just as recent as last year, found out one of my aunts has breast cancer. And so it's been proven that there are clusters of breast cancer for Black women in Southwest Memphis. And that's because of this concentration of different facilities. And XAI is only exacerbating it. It's only making it worse. So many times I've heard just this year that my allergies are worse. My asthma is worse. And so what we are seeing is the continuous proliferation of a problem that is entrenching our community with disparate impacts that is leading to a lower life expectancy. Our children go to the hospital more often, to the ER for respiratory illnesses and issues. Just last week, the city of Memphis and our region received an F in air quality, and we actually moved up the worst list you can move up. We went from 32, I want to say, to 27 on the list for terrible air by the American Lung Association. And so what Elon Musk and his methane gas data centers are doing is just exacerbating this problem that we have already been living through. And what is happening is that we are not learning from the industrial era. They are perpetuating the same practices using Big Oil's playbook. And so what we have to do now is similar to what Amy said, similar to what Allie has offered is figure out innovative ways in order to hold them back and stop them completely as we move forward, because we deserve clean air. We deserve healthy air. We deserve clean water. We deserve a healthy environment. It is our human right to this thing. And when we think about democratic processes, they have to include the people. Too often, these projects are able to make their way into our societies, make their way into our homes and our backyards, and degrade our environment and our health without our input in any way. That has to end. And so that's where we are, and that's what we are up against, and that's what we've been up against. And so my community has continued to be resilient, and I'm a product, a proud product of Southwest Memphis that's going to keep fighting for better.
Thank you so much. That is a perfect transition to the question that I have for Andrea about water and land protection. And I think you put it so beautifully, Kishan, of what the stakes are. Andrea, as we talked about earlier with Amy, water consumption of data centers is not only an issue in water scarce areas, and it's not solved by closed loop systems and other promises of efficiencies. Why is water and land protection so critical in every environment, and what does that protection look like in this moment of the data center build-out?
First, I want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be a part of this panel. And the speakers here are amazing. I'm in Michigan, which is a Great Lakes state, and we're surrounded by water. So everybody assumes that we have so much that we can just give it away, but we don't. We have to, part of our Michigan Constitution is to protect the water in the Great Lakes. We have 20% of the world's fresh water, 20%. And that's at this point in time. With climate change, it's changing really fast. We're not getting the snow that we used to because it's warmer now. And that was part of our ecosystem that brings in the water. The ice caps are melting at a quicker rate, which means that right now we have water, but we won't have it for very long. So we are depleting our fresh water at an astronomical rate. If you look through the years, decades, and centuries, we are using water so much faster than what we had in the past. And this is meant to last. We got 20% of the world's fresh water right now. I also want to say that water, which is nibi in my language, is not a resource. We should not be trading it, commodifying it, treating it as a resource. She is a sacred being, and we need to treat her as such, protect her, pray for her, and care for her as a sacred being, especially if we want her to last the next 7 generations. We started off fighting with line 5 in the pipelines because that's going right through the Straits of Mackinac, through most of Michigan. And we found then just how important water is. When we don't have it, we come from the water. We are part of the water. Water is part of every bit of our lives. Everything we eat or drink has water somewhere in there. We have to have clean, safe, affordable water. We have to. And we have to have it for the next 7 generations. That's what we work for as Indigenous people, is I'm not doing anything for me and mine. I'm working on my grandkids, making sure they have what they need. And it starts now with these fights here, these data center fights. If these data centers go in the way they want to, we're not going to be here in 7 generations. So we need to start fighting now. If you're not already fighting, you need to get up and get moving. So yeah, I think that we have a lot of work to do. We have to protect our land because we have to, our animals. It all needs protecting. Our more than human relations, right? We see them on the side of the roads. We should be protecting them also. So that's where I'm coming from, is that we need to protect and care for the water, the land, the sky, and these better, more than human relatives that we have. So we have these in our future, so we can, we see the extinction rates are so high now. Every day you're seeing another animal gone. And it's just terrible to think that my grandkids' grandkids will not know about these. And the water is so important to us that we need to keep track of that and keep it safe. I'm from Upper Michigan, that's where my tribe is from. and the water there is contaminated. We have PFAS in it from the local airports. My mother passed away from PFAS contamination. She got a rare aggressive form of cancer. So my mother's been gone 3 years because she drank the water from her own home. That's what we're dealing with. What are they putting in our water? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I just want to hold the memory of all of the elders and the young people we've lost. And thank you for sharing that with us. I want to get to the specifics of the Ypsilanti fight a bit more, so Amber, I'm going to turn to you and hope your internet is strong enough for this. Can you talk a little bit about how the community of Ypsilanti was targeted and how you identified water as a key issue to fight back around?
Yes, hello from Michigan. Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. Thanks, Ellie, Sophie, everyone at AI Now, the data center working group that brought us together today for this. I've learned a lot already, so thank you all. And everybody that's in the session right now, I also look forward to working with you on this issue. So shout out to the Michigan comments that are in the chat. So in Ypsilanti, Michigan, we are facing a huge data center fight with Los Alamos Laboratory, LANL, which is a federal program for classified work in nuclear weapons modernization and proliferation that wants to make Ypsilanti, Michigan, its home base for building out AI tech capacities. Sometime in 2024, they bought 100 acres of parkland adjacent to the Huron River and North Hydro Park. And a few months
Amber,
ago,
I'm
they
sorry
bought
to interrupt, but some folks are having trouble hearing you. I don't know if you can switch off of the headphones, maybe. It's a bit muffled.
Oh, let me try. Sure. Can you hear me now?
So much better.
Okay, great. So I was kind of outlining that in IPSI, we have been facing this huge data center fight with Los Alamos Laboratory, which is a federal program for classified work in nuclear weapons modernization proliferation. So they are trying to make Ypsilanti, Michigan a home base for building out AI tech capacities, and they bought 100 acres about a year and a half ago adjacent to parklands, and they have now added another 100 acres. So this story really starts with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is relatively popular at the time and leveraged that popularity to kind of bring in data centers into Michigan by doing public subsidies, huge public subsidies. For Los Alamos, $100 million of public funds. You know, some people believe this might have been because she was seeking a presidential run and wanted to open up some corporate backing and assuage that new industry that was coming in. So you know, that is just important context for this situation. Another unique element of the story is that University of Michigan's involvement with the project is a big part of why they're able to do what they're doing so far. So they use their nominal status as a state-funded school to attempt to create this frictionless delivery of Los Alamos as a way to drop this into our community by bypassing all our local regulatory tools like zoning and permitting, land use, etc. But they really picked the wrong ones because our community is fighting it hard. So I just want to maybe directly answer your question by saying we are being targeted as a low-income working class town adjacent to an affluent university town. For context, University of Michigan's endowment is huge. It's larger than the state of Michigan's general fund. So it's a David and Goliath situation. It is a classic story of environmental racism. A predominantly white and affluent town is dumping their trash. And in this case, their fascist capacity building infrastructure into the poorer, blacker, browner community next door, which they perceive to be less equipped to resist it. But we are going to resist it, and we have. And we have this new moratorium that just passed a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you so much. Can you talk us through the particularities of this moratorium and how did you find this specific approach? And you can speak to both the organizing and council strategy as well as the technicalities.
Sure. I would say, in short, we delayed it. You know, it's a lot of delaying. And this was done in total a collaboration with frontline movements that have been organizing on the ground. So I would say, we've taken an organizing and a kind of a political narrative approach and co-governance approach to delay. And the technical side of it is that in the narrative building and agitation approach, I'm actually technically in an adjacent community where the data center is being proposed. I couldn't actually regulate this as a city council member because it's a township council that's next door. But I could move policy in that our city created 2 resolutions that laid out every state and local actor that facilitated this data center deal and the agencies and authorities that had future stake in the project success, including our shared local water authority. So specifically, the city of Ypsilanti's resolution, which was the first year-long resolution in the state, or year-long moratorium, because many other communities did about 3 to 6 month moratoriums before us. So it's basically like a vanguard approach to agitate both the Ypsilanti Township and the Water Authority to create their own moratoriums. And so, Andrea has been following that fight and a part of it. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the on-the-ground resistance plus kind of taking our, power as a local adjacent neighboring community to say, hey, township, we want you to impose a moratorium. We want you to put pressure on our water authority too. And it's led us to this moment today.
Thank you so much. And so appreciate the point you're making about regional organizing as well. And, how this build out is happening is in many places, pushing the build out onto communities right across a jurisdictional line that have fewer resources or are perceived as less able to fight back. Andrea, I'm wondering if you can add to this and talk about how the fight in Ypsilanti and this water moratorium, how that fits in the overall strategy in Michigan to address the data center build out in your state.
Let me tell you, it really helps. We have a group of citizens from all over Michigan that have been fighting these data centers in their communities. MEJC has helped pull them together, and we're working on ordinances, more moratoriums, more ordinances. We've got bills that we have that aren't passed yet, but have all been introduced in legislation. They're repealing the tax breaks, data center tax exemptions, the clawback of the 100 million that Gretchen Whitmer decided that these U of M and Los Alamos needed of our taxpayer money. They're going against NDAs, asking that the MPSC becomes elected and not appointed by the governor, which has been a huge problem with the MPSC. They've been giving so much monies to these corporations over people who are having so much trouble right now in Michigan, trying to afford the electric bills right now. It's just, they're astronomical and going up every time they pass one, we get another one coming. And it's just fight, fight, fight. We've got large water withdrawals, ratepayer protections. We have a lot of bills that are out there that need to be passed. So that's what a lot of organizations are working on now. We're just banding together. We are finding out, though, what we found out in the beginning was Augusta Township was first. No, we were first, and we went to Ypsilanti Township, and I was asking them then if they could pass ordinances and protect us. Don't sign NDAs. And it turned out it was U of M that I think was signing all the NDAs, and they weren't telling our government anything. They literally found out that they bought the land by text message. This is the level of disrespect that is happening in our government with these data centers. They're not even considering us at all as humans or people who are living near them. Nothing. It's all about that money. So our government, the local government, really has been stepped up. They've really been working against it. They were trying to negotiate at first, and we're like, you can't negotiate with them. They're not going to listen. And that turned out to be true. So we've got groups all over Michigan, though. There's at least 100 different communities that are fighting mad, and we're fighting together. We're banding together. We just had last month 5 different rallies on the same day and time throughout Michigan to show our solidarity and what we're working for. And we're still doing more work together. We were at the Democratic Convention where we got 2 resolutions passed for the moratoriums and repealing the data centers. So that's very powerful.
Thank you. I appreciate you kind of knitting all these strategies
Yeah, it's
together.
just
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
everywhere. It is. It's just everywhere. It's like you can't just hit one spot. Everybody's got to do a different thing and just keep pushing, and applying pressure.
Thank you. Um, I'm going to turn to Amy now to get a little bit more in the weeds around data center water use. As we've talked about in preparation for this session, policy is not just legislation, right? Can you talk us through the various policy and regulatory pathways that people can use to protect water specifically, ordinances, regulatory rulemaking? Give us the breakdown.
All right, and I know I'm looking at the time, so I'm gonna try and do this quick. And that's an important question because I think when a lot of people think about policy, we think we're just talking about a state bill. And legislation is important, absolutely. But in data center fights, policy is a much bigger conversation than that. It can be a moratorium, like we've talked about today. It can be zoning, like you talked about in the prior webinar. It can be a utility service agreement. It can be a sewer ordinance. It can be a rate structure, a permit condition. Policy can be petitioned for rulemaking. It can be a lot of different things. And so, what I would tell communities is do not look for one silver bullet. You look for every bullet. Look for every place that that project needs permission because they've got to get permission from somewhere. And so, the organizing task then is to find out where those permissions sit and at every spot, force public interest protections to the front of each decision. It's going to need a bunch of different things. Find what it needs and go to the people who have the power to say yes, no, maybe, or only under these conditions. Those different services, water service, sewer service, infrastructure upgrades, they all come with questions that community can ask about how that is going to play out. There are state level stuff too, like I mentioned, petition for rulemaking. You can go to your environmental agencies, water boards, public utilities commissions. They all have power and authority to make rules for disclosure and withdrawals and drought planning. So it's not just legislation. Policy here is that full set of rules, permits, agreements, conditions that can determine whether or not these public resources are protected or handed over to a corporation.
Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about air quality and public health. And speakers, if you give me permission, maybe we'll go a few minutes over for the recording, and folks who need to drop can drop. Um, Kishan, you're in a very difficult fight up against the richest man in the world, an environment where comprehensive protective legislation, as we've talked about, is not the avenue to pass all of the protections your community needs. So can you walk through how you're using different policy, organizing, and legal strategies in this fight against XAI?
Yep. Okay. So I'm looking at the time too. And even though my dad's a preacher, I'm gonna get through this pretty quickly here. So the key thing that you want to do, is especially for folks who are in a position similar to mine, we learned about this project when as a done deal. We never had an opportunity to pass a moratorium. We never had an opportunity to really pass the legislation that we know could have protected us beforehand. Right. And so we've been innovative about what we've been able to curate and do and involve people with. And so what that looked like for us was our Shelby County Health Department hosting the first ever public hearing about an air pollution permit. Who would have thought, that would be the avenue for folks to actually have their voices heard, for folks to actually be able to have their concerns made on public record, right? And so we have to also think about creating different avenues and being innovative with the solutions that allow community engagement because that is what unearths the transparency that we're looking for. That is what really shows the people power that we know is what change and creates sustainable change that protects us and our environment long term. And so that is one way we've looked for it. And then the other thing we've done is unfortunately, y'all, you got to take people to court, right? And that has been a vehicle that has helped really in so many different spaces, including ours. And so while Memphis Community Against Pollution hasn't sued nobody, we are in full support of the Southern Environmental Law Center and Earth Justice and the NAACP, who have put forth intents to sue and have sued XAI on our behalf. And so if there is an opportunity to work with the Southern Poverty Law Center, Southern Environmental Law Center, Earth Justice, all these organizations who do put forth litigation against these bad actors who are terrible people, that's another avenue. And then lastly, y'all, we in this together. I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you live. It is all of us against them. If you're a billionaire, you're not on this call, right? I know it for a fact. And so that means you are on the side of justice. You are on the side of people who need to fight for clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment for us to live long term. Without these things, without us working together, without us leaning into the intersectionality that we know exists, whether it is the surveillance, whether it is the water use, whether it's the energy use and the economic issues that it causes for our communities, whether it is the illegal, non-consensual images, whether it is how it is impacting our economy and jobs. This issue of data centers and the overreaching of oligarchs who do not put people before profit is all of our problem. And so it's up to all of us to work together toward a solution that looks like a lot of these innovative efforts around legislation, around organizing and people building. We got to knock on doors. We got to make phone calls. We got to get out there. We can dress up in suits too. We can have t-shirts. It don't matter. But we have to reach the people that are closest to us first. And then we have to reach our broader community because this is a fight that won't go away tomorrow. It's going to be long term. And so I'm glad to be in this fight with y'all. And thank you so much for having us.
Always. Sophie or Kate, I'm going to ask you to launch the closing poll, and then I'm going to let everyone do a final kind of rapid fire round. And the prompt is, what is the strongest organizing or policy recommendation that you have right now? So, Amy, if you want to speak to regulatory interventions around air quality, Amber, if you want to speak to how to organize with your city council or local government, up to you. Let's go, Amy, Amber, Andrea, and Kishan. You can close us out. And in the meantime, everyone, please do this poll while you listen.
Oh, okay. Last kind of closing thoughts here. There is not a silver bullet anywhere. But what we can do is look at the air, whether it's water, is look at where the power is. Where does the data center have to have a permission? And every place that it has to have a permission, get involved in that spot. One other thing that I will bring up is that it is very easy for a data center to silo this off and make us look at one permit for one project separately. Air's over here, water's over here. It's not a sexy or creative strategy, but it's a very pragmatic strategy to get all of the pieces together. Use your permits, your zoning, public comments, civil rights complaints, health data, legal interventions. Make the whole question, the whole picture be answered, because communities aren't experiencing a facility in piecemeal. They're experiencing the whole burden. So go get the full suite of answers from all the various agencies that have the ability to help you. And last comment, don't take preemption as the end of the discussion. Never accept that as an answer. Don't let them get away with that. Let them tell you exactly what authority was taken away and exactly what they've got left, because they still have something they can do. All right, everybody else, see how quick we can get in last thoughts with everybody.
Thank you, Amy, for bringing up preemption. I'm at a preemption convening where we're studying what the state does in authoritative action to, disenfranchise us. And so my last words really is that we cannot only be on the defensive strategy. We need to be on the offensive strategy. And part of that is doing their tactics on them. And at the local level right now, that what it is whatever you can with what you have, whatever power you have to slow things down, do that now so we can buy the time to study things like, applications for large quantity water users, and what policy we can do to institute to agitate and be on the offensive at the higher authorities. Thank you.
Andrea and Kishan.
Yeah, I'll go then. What we found that works well is us all banding together. We're talking about what one group is doing, what one group of citizens are doing, what another group of citizens are doing, what's working, what's not working, how can we support. If there's a meeting, either zoning or township about economic development strategies is what they've been using, or they flat out data center zonings, we all show up. There's a bunch of people that show up. So when they're looking out there making these decisions, they see a lot of people. And what's also been working is ballot initiatives, stopping the data centers. We got one for money out of politics. We have a big one problem with that. Our local utilities is taking over everything. So we're working on trying to get that on the initiative. They're still working on it. But really, the threat of recall. We've got a lot of governments, local governments are under recall right now. They're being sued for not listening to their constituents. Constituents have said no, and then they make fun of them or joke around about it, play it down like they don't know what's going on in their own communities and making fun of the citizens. And the citizens got mad and are recalling them. Power to the people. Fight it everywhere we can and fight it together. Thank you.
Real quick, all power to the people. We all are the people who will make the change. We deserve better. We know it. We feel it. And we have a community of people who know that. And so all I want to let everybody on this call know is that we are not helpless in this situation. We're not hopeless. We are up against some folks who got a lot of money on paper, but it's more of us than it is of them. I promise you that. And so let's stick together. Let's learn from each other. Let's collaborate and let's stay in community and fight back. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our incredible panel. I want 3 days just listening to you all. I've learned so much from you, and I'm just in awe of you and the organizing you do every single day. I'm going to pass it over to Sophie to close us out with some resources, and we are going to try to address these remaining questions in follow-up.
Thank you, all of our amazing panelists. That was like a truly beautiful discussion. So just real quick as we close out, there's a closing poll. If you haven't seen it, please fill it out. Our next session for the training series is Wednesday, May 27th. We'll be focusing on energy policy featuring Jean Su from the Center of Biological Diversity and Katie Miner from the Alliance for Affordable Energy and more. Next slide. Just want to share some policy and organizing resources. They've already been placed in the chat, but here's a link to our North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit, information for upcoming trainings. Our policy and practice series can be, you can sign up for our policy and practice series with the link here. And our partners at the Kairos Fellowship, who are also members of the Data Center Working Group, are starting a training series focusing on organizing tactics. They'll be starting on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on May 19th and going through June. Also for folks engaging in data center site fights, we have our organizing guide. And if you have any needs for policy support or want to get in touch, you can reach us at datacenters@ainowinstitute.org. Next slide. And I just want to leave you with ways to get involved. If you would like to join the Data Center Working Group, there is a link to our interest form. And here's information for all of the organizations our amazing panelists are involved in: Memphis Community Against Pollution, Southeast Climate Energy Network, North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and Stop the Data Center Ypsilanti. And I believe that's all from me and all from us. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in a few weeks.